reunion of sorts in some respects, because a while ago in 2019, the ITU arranged for a concert which was performances that included AI, and some of us on stage were there 4 years ago. And that was back when we had to explain what machine learning was. And now we're here where everybody kind of thinks that they know. And you know, 4 years later, machine learning sort of making headlines every week. And in music as well, we've got everything from voice cloning artists to algorithmic raving. So there's still an appetite for synthesized art. But it's a nebulous area, hence the panel. And we've got questions around ethics, ownership, aesthetics, and as musicians in AI and artists, it probably takes about 0.3 seconds before we start talking about philosophy, would you say? It's very, very quick. It's, hi, oh, you do AI art? And then we're into deep conversations. So this panel aims to explore the creative approaches that we've been sort of doing and gives rise to these larger themes outside of AI, which is probably why we're here as artists on a stage that has been hosting businesses, industries, research, academics. It's an incredibly interesting area. So, panel, hello. Let's start with a little explanation briefly of what kinds of art you do with AI, please. And Harry, I'm aware you've got a video that you've brought, so if it's okay, let's play your video and then you can talk about it afterwards. Thank you very much.
How do we actually see ourselves through the lens of a machine?
How does our desire for perfection affect our ability to be creative?
Searching for the humanity between art, music, science, and technology.
Why does it look good? Where does that beauty or sense of wonder come from?
Oh, we just get the microphones working.
1, 2. So in 2019, we had an expression at ITU where myself and Mio and LJ were invited to direct a happening. And I think there's a lot of unrest and confusion and discussion about the role of creativity, the role of the arts in innovation. And I think it's really, really important to think about, well, what are living, breathing examples of individuals working and interacting with these technologies. So in 2021, ITU approached me to discuss the concept of a visionary. And regardless of medium or discipline, what are very unique examples of artists that are really warmly embracing these systems. And this is where AI-VI was born. So this initiative identifies this loose term of visionaries, not as just a celebration, but to really think about what are the present examples of people self-developing, improving their expertise through machine-based collaboration. And I think there's a real question about what is an artist in research, what is the language that we're using when it comes to creativity and embracing the arts, but also creative technologists. So with innovation, and with all of these global problem-solving stages, more and more institutions are really starting to think about introducing creativity into the question, and obviously helping us define, well, how are we speaking about creativity as a whole, and helping undo sensationalism with sensation.
Brilliant, an interesting opening thought. And then Portrait XO, I'd just like to bring you in here. What kind of art do you do and why?
So I started with classical music on piano, and I guess I've fallen into a deep rabbit hole of being inspired by different technologies over time, integrating art and science into my practice. And I have a very peculiar relationship with sound, similar to Harry, with voices. And at the root of everything over the years, it's become more and more important, the need for translating the very strange abstractions of the kind of work we're doing to create more explicit examples and experiences so that we can have a wider perspective and narrative around AI. And I think that's the interesting time now that we've lifted the hood. And I think artists are really good at showing the possibilities and limitations and what we can do within these boundaries.
Brilliant, thank you very much indeed. Mio, over to you. Please explain a little about your relationship with AI.
I actually come from, so I started coding in the 90s, and I was starting also my artistic practice in the 90s, mostly as a dancer back then. I have had since then quite some human experiences on real-world stages, and I played around with a lot of different digital sensations, trying to see how much life I can get from it. Now, if I overlap those two sensations, like this digital life and the real life, the tangible life, the more human life, I do believe that the digital sensations could help us to explore more about human nature. Now, that sounds very intangible, and I would like to make that more graspable as an example. We just saw this beautiful talk about AI being biased, because that data basically is biased. Now, we could repair that data. I would also argue we could also repair how we act. We could also act differently in space and produce more unbiased data. Then we wouldn't need to create that much. And that is what I mean with digital new technologies, statistics, as well as artificial intelligence being a mirror to human nature. It's just very often that we don't like what we see. That is not the fault of that mathematical principle, but maybe of our actions. That is what's interesting to me.
Thank you very much. Sougwen, it's over to you.
My name is Sougwen. I've been working with AI and robotic systems for almost a decade now, actually. And I've been working with robotics and drawing to really think about what becomes of the human hand when we have these generative image technologies. I think it's a really interesting intersection because we can think about the evolution of human creativity, but also the evolution of muscle memory, the evolution of vision, bias, obviously. And what I do is I've been developing a generational robotic system named Drawing Operations Unit Generation 1 to 5, where I collaborate with a robotic arm trained on my own data, trained on my own biofeedback data, and my own painting data to try to think about that mark made by hand and how it evolves through performance and research. Yeah, it's an interesting space to be thinking about hybridity, and that's really at the core of what I've been exploring.
Brilliant, thank you so much. I noticed that in all of our work, we tend to talk about AI as a collaborator, not necessarily as an innovator. It's almost like we try and create these companions to help us create our art. I want to talk a little bit about that work and how it's impacted you outside of the AI sphere, if that makes sense. So have you noticed your evolution as an artist over the last 4 years, or even the way you think outside of your art as a result of your interactions with the machines? I'll start with you again, Harry. You're closest.
So specifically, my work is centered around voice. I think it's really fascinating that something as old as the human voice can still innovate. I think through working with machines, I approach it very similar to game theory. So in the sense of having a world-class chess player augment with the intelligence of engines, even though this system is not present with them all the time in world-class play, the ability to ideate, to have a mentorship, to collaborate, and especially to be opposed by these technologies, to be pushed back by a system, it really enforces you into what I call an intelligent interruption. So where I would sing and perform or have phraseologies of a certain consistency, is actually through my constant rehearsal with machines that has allowed me to find new patterns, think of music outside of the paradigm that I built over 10 years. And I think it's that difference and identifying that difference, how the augmentation has led to something new. Even outside of the arts, we are seeing more and more of these partnerships where an agent, which is a system, is able to develop insights that leads to something that is valuable for your practice. So in terms of speed, control, ideation, this is something that has been exponential over the last 3 years through my constant practice and rehearsal with machines.
It's really interesting. I met a rapper the other day who had taught himself to sing like an auto-tune So he was able to take like a machine and be inspired by it. And that's where I'm going to bring you in, Portrait XO, because I know that you have quite an intimate relationship with the AI that you work with.
Yeah, so I think the most profound for me has been the revelation that whatever I thought AI was revealed completely just constant surprises. But it's the unexpected and unpredictable nature of AI, the imperfections and the glitches that I've fallen in love with. And so while we have other uses of AI, and the way I've used it was with my voice as well, training a custom AI model and listening back to my voice sing in very strange ways was a very peculiar experience for self-reflection and also an ability to become more intimate with my own way of working and hearing pattern recognition, but through the lens of a machine. And so I think that what this showed was that while we are striving for perfection and to improve our craft, there were two main takeaways. One was demystifying the hype a little bit around this misconception that people who use AI want to have automated everything, which is far from the truth, because I can't think of a single creative friend, including myself, who want to replace our own human creativity or replace our skills. I think most creatives want to enhance and express to the best that we can, and we want to improve our skills in whatever way we can.
So when I saw you nodding along there when we were talking about this idea of the machines and not wanting to replace people and instead to kind of work with them.
I really love these conversations because I think they're really intriguing and challenging, seeing every practitioner think about the systems that they build and work with as creative catalysts, always really exciting. I think whereas I don't sing and I'm not a voice practitioner, I think for me the collaboration on a canvas happens through obviously the change and adaptation of my mark and the expanding of my socio-technical knowledge of the system itself and how to build an AI, build a recurrent neural network, build a robotic unit. I think there's a lot of learning in that, but also through this intergenerational evolution of the drawing system itself. So going from computer vision to recurrent neural networks to optical flow, computer vision systems to biofeedback has been a way that, yeah, there's just been mutual change and development, which has been really expansive for the practice.
Brilliant, thank you. I strongly recommend everybody having a look at the remarkable artwork that all of these people do. It's all different mediums and all of it's quite overwhelming and makes you think very deeply. And Mio, I'm going to bring in this question about the challenges that we could see coming down the line. We've talked a lot on stage about what's going to happen in the future. I know that you've got some views of specific challenges that you can see on the horizon of
to me, the biggest challenge is pacing. That is by far the biggest problem. It was, yeah, like you said, 4 years ago when we discussed here at the United Nations what would be called today generative AI, but that was back then the philosophy evening. That was back then a guess about the future. That is already yesterday's news now. Within the time in between, we have not been culturally prepared. And that is a problem. Now, where's that problem coming from when its impact on society is measured? If we look at a certain level of disruption, then I believe it can be calculated by how deep the existing status quo had an impact on society, how long it had that impact on society, how different the new status quo is, and how fast it comes. If you do this with mobility, diesel cars, then they have been around for 100 years. They will be now challenged by an electric mobility for the next 10 years, 15 years, and they have shaped our inner cities. That's a disruption that will make a lot of companies quite shake a lot, especially in Germany, as you can imagine. Now think of that mental model applied to human thinking. That's roughly 80,000 years. It has shaped how we perceive the whole world, and it will change in the next 10 years, 100%. That is the total load of pressure that not only the energy is needed for training the digital models, it will also cost humans a lot of energy to digest real quick. Where is this energy and this will to understand this new world coming from fast enough? We just perceived the last 5 years how the world has quickly changed. For a lot of people, not comprehensible. They were going nuts. They just didn't feel connected to reality. How are we supposed to translate to this new reality and this new challenge? And this is where I think the United Nations, the ITU is coming in. It is something that we urgently, on a wide and very diverse level globally, need to speak about. And this is, I think, what we're missing.
I could just see you lift up the microphone. Please, go ahead.
There's a quote by a Chinese activist that I really love, which I think really resonates with what you're saying, which is, there are times when expanding one's imagination is what's required. And I do think we're at a space where, in a lot of ways, the recursion of these models and data sets actually stifles the way we think about the possibilities of the medium. We can do better than a lot of the metaphors and examples and products that we have out there right now. We can do better than a robot in a dress when thinking about how to implement collaborative AI systems technologies. So yeah, very much I think that's the challenge moving forward.
Harry, I just saw you nodding when Sougwen said we can do better.
Well, I mean, I think this is the key central subject is these innovations fundamentally should be about human development. And I think there is such a difference to beholding a system or an outcome and actually allowing these systems to feed back into whatever expertise or interest or passion. And there are some sad stories emerging when it comes to the redistribution of intelligence. There are young people in working class and minorities who are getting advice or nourishment from systems and large language models that should be coming from the home. And I think if we can create new creative archetypes, if we can redefine what creativity is, understand what intelligence is, I think this is something really about human development. And I'm very fascinated by expertise as the whole, but I think it's really about general human creativity, intelligence, being augmented and allowing for spaces and environments that wouldn't have access to certain knowledge or power, feeling that nourishment. And I think that in itself is a creative act to allow people to have access to intelligence on tap. And that comes with responsibility. But I think artists and the creatives can reach audiences that institutions cannot. And institutions around the world are so in need of being able to look forward and update. So I wonder who the storytellers are with the incredible minds, with the most important stories that spread that intelligence and that power and that insight into a contemporary, updated, present form.
I think the idea of mastery is a very interesting one when it comes to AI, because prior to that, you would need to understand how to use a search engine to access the knowledge, and then you need to verify it. And what's happening now is people are having conversations and querying data without needing to know how to code, or you can write music without having to play an instrument, which I'm going to go into in my little performance later on this evening. I'm going to ask something provocative as we have 4 or 5 minutes left of this panel, which is, does AI make artists lazy, or does it make more art? Who wants to go in for that one?
I feel like I've spent the past decades finding the most complicated way to just draw a line, if I'm honest. So I would like to be lazy at some point. But no, I think there's, again, one of the joys of the practice has been learning more about the technology. We talk about technology as a black box, but when you're actually classifying, digitizing 2 decades of your own drawing to build a custom robotic unit using a variety of sensors, there's nothing lazy about it, but it makes artists engineers, it makes artists philosophers, artists researchers, and I think that's really exciting because the tools of the day can help us interrogate so much about the human condition and the technological landscape. And so I don't think that's being lazy at all.
I just wanted to elicit these answers because we all know on stage that most of what we do when we're creating is we're frustrated at something because it doesn't work properly, and we then try something else, and that sort of works, and then you just end up hacking around until you reach something that nearly approximates what we want. I know that you've been doing this when you created your sort of version of yourself to interact with musically.
I think it's just a very small point. I think we think a lot about collaboration, but I'm very interested in opposition. And I think that these systems can challenge us. These technologies can really force us into uncomfortable places, which can actually be one of the most powerful things for self-development and expertise. We've seen that in game theory for a long time. Embracing that into all expertise, I think, is something we will see more and more. But opposition with ownership, not to replace or to automate.
Thank you.
To Harry's point, too, I think there's something really lovely about new prompts being able to lower the barrier to entry for the creation of visual culture. I think that's about a different type of mastery that's more about just communicating a message. And I get really excited to see a lot of people being able to engage with the image. Obviously, there are caveats to that, but at its core, there's something really, really exciting about that.
There's something beautiful about allowing anyone to write a symphony or draw a beautiful piece of artwork, so I understand that. Just with a few minutes left, I'm going to ask Mio and Portrait XO for your final thoughts on where you see the future going.
I could only answer that, like, coming from Berlin, from and please excuse this, from a more maybe Eurocentric perspective, unfortunately. And in Europe, at least, and I have seen this being different in Asia and the US market, there's a strong separation between design and art. So to produce, for instance, an image is really the craftsmanship, also digital craftsmanship, of a beautiful designer. That is quite hard to do, especially the generated images we saw earlier. And I would be lying if I would say this is a strong business model still. Really, it's same for copywriting. It doesn't make sense. I would be lying, I'm sorry. But it's very different with art, at least from this perspective, because art, in my opinion, is the human intent to ask a question. That intent is not reduced in its value in the light of the current philosophical challenges. It's just actually increased. So if the only output an artist would do is a decorated image, then I would say there's difficult times ahead. If there is a question attached that reflects upon a societal change, then I think it is more needed than ever.
Okay, Portrait XO, I'm just going to give you the final word because I'm aware of the time. So any thoughts on the future before we wrap the panel? A big responsibility.
I think that we have this interesting era of what I love this word that our dear friend CJ Carr, musician, data scientist, said. We are living in a time of infobesity, like literally overwhelming amounts of information, multimodal synthetic models that are constantly being generated faster than we can think. So we have an overabundance of solutions, and I often contemplate on what problems can we solve, but are some problems not solvable because they're paradoxes that need to be better managed. So I contemplate a lot of these things within the context of human-machine collaboration. I think that if we can just strip down to the raw basics of what it means to be human, and just remember that we are fundamentally here with two fundamental needs, which is expression and connection. And I mean that as in like a connection to ourselves as well as each other. If we can just keep those ground fundamental universal truths for our decision-making process when they are really complex and difficult, hopefully that will shine a better light in whatever we end up with.
Brilliant. Thank you very much.